That's your library. You know, Roy, do you remember when we released the monograph, when you guys released the monograph, we did like a webinar, and I think that's the exact same background.
It's this exact same
Yeah,
library.
yeah, yeah,
I
yeah,
haven't moved for 25 years.
yeah. Okay. All right, everyone, we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you for spending your lunch hour with me. Today, we have a very special guest, Roy Upton, who many of you may know the American Herbal Pharmacopoeia from the Cannabis Monograph. And before we jump in, I just want to reiterate like how important the AHP monograph was in allowing us to evolve medical cannabis programs into statewide distribution programs because we had the will of the people for there to be access to medical cannabis. But when we went to the state legislature and said, here's the licensing protocol, and they asked us, well, how do we regulate these? I said, leave it up to the Department of Health. And they said, well, we don't know how to do that. And so it wasn't until we partnered with Roy and also with APA, Michael McGuffin, to create the recommendations for regulators that the monograph with those recommendations allowed us to move into these complex distribution programs. So, Roy, thank you so much. It's like
Oh,
you made such a huge difference. We were kind of just flailing at the state level. So, you will always have a special place in my heart, but also, I just want to make sure that everyone knows what a huge footnote AHP has had in the progress of medical cannabis in the United
no,
States.
thank you. Thank you. And thank ASA. ASA, provided the sponsorship so that could actually occur. So thank you so much too.
When I first started ASA, I was actually talking to a friend of mine's husband, Alan Trachtenberg. I was telling him what I was going to do. Do you know Alan? And
Yeah, I knew him 30 years ago.
yeah, yeah.
I think first at the Office of Alternative Medicine, if I'm
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
right. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
when I was telling him my plans, he's like, you have to get a monograph. First thing, you got to get a monograph. And this was, a few years before I met you. And I was like, okay, I'll get to it, And I didn't really understand its importance. So I was like, oh shit, we need a monograph.
Yeah.
And he also gave me a little sort of warning of being careful about taking easy off ramps and trying to integrate cannabis into healthcare. And one of them was, don't get stuck in like employee benefits, right? Like push for it to be in insurance or, only privileged people will get it. So I think
Yeah.
he was talking about acupuncture, I think is what he worked, yeah, on. But yeah, that's what I started tracking you down, and then I was like, but we need guidelines for labs. I was like, that's what a monograph is stuff. I was like,
Yeah.
okay. So, so what are you up to now? What's HP up to? And I'm just gonna kind of let you tell some fun stories about 30 years at
Yeah,
HP.
well, I mean that is a milestone. July. This represents the 30th year that we've been in established as a nonprofit or 501(c)(3), and the original genesis of AHP was to protect access.
Mhm.
So Americans for safe access, but it wasn't for cannabis. It was for botanical medicine or botanical products in general. Um, FDA, a lot of people don't know this. In like 1991, I think it was, FDA wrote a Federal Register notification basically saying that any botanical whose only known use is for medicinal purposes shall be regulated as a drug, right? Up until then, they'd only been regulated as foods or, excuse me, supplements.
Right.
But at the time, it costs $231 million to bring a drug to market. Now it's almost $1 billion to bring a drug to market.
Yeah.
And so the idea that they were going to regulate botanicals in the same way as drugs, which, before allowing them in the market, it's is like, no, this changed my life. I went from being basically a clinical herbalist to being an herbalist activist.
Hmm.
Literally, that one sentence, literal sentence in this Federal Register notification changed my life forever. But when we were lobbying for protection, and the
Hmm.
protection came with the Dietary Supplement Health and Education Act. Um, people on both sides of the aisle, Republicans, Democrats, those who oppose us, those who were against botanical medicines, they all ask the same questions. How do you know what you know? What about quality control? What
Right.
about indications? What about use in pregnancy? What about drug interactions? So they kept on asking these same questions, and I realized that there wasn't one repository for that information to exist. I knew the literature well enough that I could kind of deal with their concerns, but there wasn't one place that we could reach to, and that's why I started AHP was really to preserve access. Um, Now 30 years later, you asked, what am I doing now? Um, Basically the same thing, but on a global scale.
Hmm.
I know that the Cannabis Monograph has had an impact globally.
Yep.
Um, I think I remember you telling me that there was a legislator in like the Czech Republic or something that held up our monograph in their legislature, said, "This is what we need. This is what we need."
It's
Uh,
actually in several countries, right? Like
yeah,
the HP monograph really, we went, there's now over 60 countries that have medical cannabis, federal medical cannabis programs. And the monograph, it just, you just as you said, it just changed all the questions, right, that people
yeah,
have. Because I
yeah,
think, we are, especially for cannabis people, we're used to so much stigma and discrimination that when someone is asking us a legitimate question, sometimes we still think it's an attack. And really,
yeah,
sometimes people are just saying, what is it? Right? And the monograph, answers that in a way. It's not the way I talk every day, right? But it's the way physicians talk. It's the way, it's what our public health officials need. So yeah, it's
yeah.
a big deal.
Yeah. And the interesting, the Brits had already gone through that like 10 years before,
Mhm.
where herbal medicine was being attacked in the UK, and their response was the British Herbal Pharmacopoeia. And the
Right.
first thing I said in my mind, okay, we need an American Herbal Pharmacopoeia. We have the United States Pharmacopoeia, who's the legal um, they have the illegal authority to develop standards for drug products, but
Yeah.
nobody was there for herbal products or supplement products.
Right.
And they at the time they weren't interested in botanicals. It's all chemical drugs. So thus the genesis of AHP. And but then you fast forward in 2023, I participated in a World Health Organization traditional medicine symposium, a global summit that was held in Gujarat, India. And I'd known about WHO's traditional medicine work forever. And I actually, just yesterday, I learned a little bit of their history of where they came from. Is that in like the early 1970s, China had what was called a barefoot doctors program. And what
Uh-huh.
that was they would train, they recognized that a lot of people that lived in the rural areas didn't have access to any health care.
Right.
Local practitioners, and they recognized that the local practitioners who were practicing traditional Chinese medicine were the primary gatekeepers for healthcare. And this is for many things, but they recognized that was limited. They didn't have access to Western medicine care. So what they did was they took that existing, I thought this was brilliant. They
Yeah.
took that existing workforce that was already culturally aligned, culturally in place, already a labor force, and they provided them basic training in Western medical sciences and like a paramedic training, so
Right.
that
Right.
they could legitimately deal with minor injuries.
Crisis medicine, right?
Yeah,
Crisis
crisis
medicine.
medicine,
Yeah. Yeah.
but also so they would know enough not to hurt anybody,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
there were tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, of these barefoot doctor people, and that actually inspired the genesis of what's called the Declaration of Alma Ata,
Yep.
which is a WHO declaration, which basically says we need to provide health care to the world's population, and
Yep.
the only way that they saw that could happen was by actively encouraging traditional medicine practices. So again, I've known about their work forever, but I never was involved. I was never participated in, and so I served as an advisor on this first global summit, Steph, and I'm going like thinking there's a whole bunch of stuff that I would like to put in their minds of what they
Right.
should be doing. And from the opening session,
Yep.
was like they were doing it in spades. They were already on it.
Yeah. Yep.
They had the talking points brilliantly, and that's from individual health to community health to national health, international health, global health to planetary health,
Yep.
right? And this is always what I felt about herbal medicine. It's the only sustainable form of medicine on earth,
Yep.
right? All the chemical stuff, you think about it, pharmaceutical drugs now are the number one cause of preventable deaths in like 10 countries, including the United States. So that means
Yep.
the things that we're taking that should be making us well are actually killing us more than cigarettes and alcohol. That's like, to me, that's mind blowing. And
Right.
then the much of that comes out of the petrochemical industry as well. And so that's like the sixth worst polluter on the face of the earth. So if the things that we're taking to make us well are both killing us more than cigarettes and alcohol and poisoning the planet, there's something wrong with that healthcare picture.
Right.
And in my worldview, herbal medicine is one of the big answers to that. And mind body and
Yep.
lifestyle medicine, functional medicine, integrative medicine, whatever you want to call it. But so it's a different take. They were already doing it, Steph, in
Yep.
spades.
I know they're great. They're doing amazing work around the planet and
They were
bringing
doing it in other countries, and that's the sad part. It wasn't, there's almost no representation from the US, and that's really sad.
Well, you were there, thank goodness, thank goodness. I think that's also part of activism. People often ask me, well, well, I'm not an advocate, and I was like, you're here, right? Because I think showing up is that's 85% of being an advocate, right? Is showing up and being present. And I think, part of what we're struggling with in medical cannabis, that I've seen a lot of parallels with herbal medicine and, going back to, the federal landscape in 91 and then, the passage of DeShay, that what like that was positive in a sense that there was a legality, but this sort of unfinished work, of making sure that cannabis or that herbal medicines were integrated into healthcare so that they were part of insurance coverage, doctor education, that's created, it's kept like a bifurcated healthcare system, right?
Yes.
And the same is happening for cannabis. Like people run into me, they're like, "Oh, you're still working on that cannabis thing?" And I always say, well, I didn't change the name of the organization to Privileged Americans for Safe Access, right?
Yeah.
And so,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah.
and I think that I had a lot of conversations with Michael and others, Michael McGuffin from APA and others in that community. And there was at one time, I have the legislative draft of a traditional medicines bill in the United States. And the challenge, what they kept hitting up against was that traditional medicine practitioners did not want to be regulated, that they didn't want to have to register. That was one of the stakeholder groups. And I think with cannabis, because we've had to create these like mini healthcare models state by state, education of all like those pieces have kind of happened. And so part of what I'm hoping is that in the way that herbal medicine really laid out a path for us to walk on, that we could be a gateway to herbal medicines making their way into integration so that it's available to everyone.
Yeah, I would support you on that. And it was Michael and I's idea. It was predominantly my idea to do the traditional medicines directive, and Michael and I have always been partners on everything. He's on my board of directors until he passed, a couple of months ago, sadly. And
Yeah.
but um but yeah, we got tremendous amount of pushback actually, ironically, from the herbalist.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, this is actually an amazing initiative because it's the first time in the history that we know of in the United States that we had herbalists, acupuncturists, chiropractors, nutritionists, naturopathic physicians, organic and regenerative farmers, everybody that was involved in the herbal world at the
Yep.
same Ayurvedic, Chinese medicine, all at the same table saying, yes, we needed this because we're dancing around this thing of valerian is helps to promote a restful sleep.
Right.
We
Right.
can't say it's for insomnia or, because of the legislative regulatory environment, you can't a doctor can't prescribe it for
Right.
insomnia. They can't get reimbursed for using an herbal medicine. It's nowhere integration. And the same thing on the practitioner side. We make all these inroads. For example, Chinese medicine practitioners. We have a legal framework to practice traditional Chinese medicine, which mostly focuses on acupuncture in almost all states, and almost
Yeah.
actually in more, yeah, in virtually all jurisdictions, including like Puerto Rico, Samoa, to some Puerto
Yeah.
Rico, Virgin Islands to some degree. Um, but not in the federal reimbursement system. Or actually, we were just recently Medicare approved of acupuncture for something like lower back pain or knee pain or something like
Yep.
that. But then they stipulated that only doctors could do it. It's
Yeah.
like the doctors aren't trained in
Right.
acupuncture, as acupuncture, and you have literally tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of practitioners fully trained
Yep.
that aren't able to get reimbursed for the simplest of indications, um, and naturopaths. So Chinese medicine is in virtually all jurisdictions, whereas naturopathic medicine is in like 22 states.
Yep.
How's that work?
Right.
Where your
Exactly.
own system of naturopathic medicine, for example, that's been in this country since about 1914,
Yep.
there's no federal recognition. They're not in the federal reimbursement system. Most states don't reimburse it. Again, it goes back to what you said. It's rich folks who can afford it,
Right.
or who are so, dang committed to a natural approach to healthcare that they're willing to pay out of pocket, and pay for the herbal medicines, pay for the consults. And I think you probably know many of the traditional medicine practitioners, you know, to get to them, just to do a consult, you walk through the door, it's 150, 200, $350, and it's like that's out of pocket. Now, granted, they're telling you, trying to teach you how to change your life so you don't have to keep coming back. Whereas the
Right.
the Western medicine system, it's a cash machine. The more we can get you coming back from mammograms that actually the most recent reviews say don't do, except maybe every 5 years,
Right. Right.
rather than every year, which is driving like teenagers to get radical mastectomies as a prophylaxis against breast cancer, right? So we have access to that stuff, but we don't have access to everything that we hold near and dear. It's shameful.
And I think I spent a lot of time in Europe and in other countries working on setting up medical cannabis programs. And I think one of the most frustrating things coming back to the US is, there's such a difference when you don't have a for-profit healthcare system, right? Like solutions are just different, right? I mean, in Europe, they still have pharmacies. I mean, and what I mean, we call them compounding pharmacies, but they're really pharmacies, right? They actually still make drugs in their
Yeah.
pharmacies. And I think without going too far into the past, future, I find myself often telling people, I think you're confusing capitalism with conspiracy, right? It's not a conspiracy. Like we call these for-profit businesses. That's like we've made that decision here in the U.S. But I do think, there's so much to learn, from the work that you guys have done. And I think, at one level, you have to make sure everyone is talking about the same thing. And I really think that's where HP has made such a huge impact. Because right now we are having an issue where we have over 6 million registered patients, right, in the United States. Like that's bigger than any clinical trial ever conducted. But we have so little information from these patients and part of it is language, right? Researchers are using one set of language that you have doctors that are being educated about something else. Patients are learning about like, names of things like green crack, right? And then they come back to their doctor and they say green crack is helping, right? Um,
Yeah.
and then there's no, sort of feeding into product manufacturers. There's not the rich experience. And so I think that expanding that terminology standardization is going to be a big part of the next step of what we're doing. Uh,
Yeah.
but I'm wondering, within, I guess I've been looking at the history of herbal medicines. And some of the people I've talked to is that there was sort of a blessing and a curse with the passage of Deshay. That on one hand, you had, herbal medicines were definitely legal. On the other hand,
Herbal
I mean,
supplements.
herbal
Well,
supplements, right? But they were changed to herbal supplements. That's the other
yeah,
part, right? That they went from this idea, and in fact, the 91 uh, regulation that you mentioned, it spurred this sort of movement of creating a pathway for herbal medicines at the FDA.
yeah,
And so, for medical cannabis patients, a lot of people don't understand that we've been fighting several fights. One has been about the prohibition of cannabis, which is a racist, horrible, ingrained fight that has, funded a lot of jobs in law enforcement and drug testing companies for years. But the other is that right now there is not a pathway at the FDA for complex botanicals to move forward. And where, the FDA keeps pointing to the botanical drug development document. But even within that document, they say they recognize that this will not work for complex botanicals, right? So I think that for us, the next step is redefining medicine in this country.
yeah, yeah.
And that means bringing in all those stakeholders. But, Mike, I have that, by the way, I have the draft of the traditional medicine legislation. I don't know when the last time you saw it was, but I was just looking at it the other day. I was
You
like,
might
yeah,
have to send it to me. I don't know
I
if
will.
my computers have kept up with being able to even open it.
Yeah, I think I think it was one of the last emails I got from Michael, actually, because we
Uh,
were talking about it
okay.
again. So,
Yeah,
but he keeps bringing it back up to me, like, here, you should try this stuff. Let me
yeah,
know when
yeah,
you're done with cannabis. That's what he kept saying. So,
yeah.
um, but with as far as the work that you're doing globally and seeing how other countries are embracing herbal medicines, are you seeing a pathway of integration into healthcare? Because I know that we have this crisis that people aren't kind of putting the dots together that you talked a lot about, which is, we have all of these complex chronic conditions, right, that are not being helped by traditional pharmaceuticals. And in this country, the way that Western medicine is dealing with it is polypharmacy, which is also killing people. And so, yeah, I would love to see just if you've seen any models internationally that you think that could be a path for that, or we're just going to have a radical definition change.
I think it's actually both.
Mhm.
So, excuse me, I spend a lot of time also in Europe, Asia, and a little bit in India. So, for example, I mean, China has brilliant integration. I take that back. China has brilliant access to whatever the person wants. So, if they want Chinese medicine, if they want acupuncture, there's an acupuncture ward in many hospitals. It's right there. There's an herbal medicine ward. There's a Twain-hour ward. There's a moxibustion, division. Um, there's actually only one pure traditional Chinese medicine hospital in China that's all they do. They just do Chinese medicine. It's a beautiful. Everybody who is interested in the subject should just visit it just to walk in the lobby. It is drop dead gorgeous. And
Nice.
but interestingly, that is also looked at by some as failing, as not succeeding from an economic
Hmm.
perspective. And I'm like, what do you mean? I said they're treating like 1,000 patients a day. They're doing a couple of thousand prescriptions that they dispense out of their pharmacy per day. How is this not a success? And what they told me was, well, if they go to the Western hospital and they get an MRI, the hospital is reimbursed, $7,000 or $15,000 for doing that MRI. And but if a TCM practitioner does a pulse diagnosis, tongue diagnosis, that's $0 because they never value time, right?
Yeah,
China didn't really value time. That's why the labor force is much cheaper than in Western countries because they feel like they have all the time in the world. They're going to work their workers to death, 10, 15, 18 hours a day for, relatively speaking, bowls of rice in some cases. And so labor's cheap and not valued, whereas procedures are. And that's what
interesting.
our system, the Western
Yeah,
medical system is based on procedures. Let's do is get every woman doing an annual mammogram, whether it works or is helpful or not. and you just have it as a cash cow. And our PSA testing for prostate stuff in men. Um, so in China, you don't have you have ready access, and that's wonderful. In most European countries, so it's not you have access to traditional medicine throughout the European Union as a regulatory category, just as we have dietary supplements. Um, but they're very limited for what they can offer.
Right.
So, for example, like the European Pharmacopoeia has almost no combinations. They have like, I think they have three or four, like valerian and hops or valerian and passion flower, like two herb combinations, but they don't have trifla, they don't have shaoyawan, they don't have any of
Right.
the complex formulas that are the heart and soul of traditional medicine. But that's actually changing.
Yeah.
Literally, as of last month, I just
Yeah.
saw, notification that says we're looking at creating a pathway for
Yeah.
bringing Ayurvedic and Chinese medicines into the European fold.
Yeah.
So hopefully that'll change over the next 10 years. Um, so I both I see the positives and I see the negatives. And then in France, for example, only MDs
Right.
can provide acupuncture care.
Right.
In the US, only MDs can get reimbursed for specific acupuncture treatments. Um, in Germany, Austria, Switzerland. Switzerland's interesting. 12 years ago, Switzerland actually made a constitutional amendment that basically says that every Swiss citizen has the right to natural and alternative health care as an inherent option as part of their constitution. This is one of the things that I'm going to try to push on the global level to at
Mhm.
least create language that would work globally to
I love
say,
it.
and it doesn't have to say anything about natural medicine. What has to say is that we should have the right to the healthcare option that we choose, that
Right.
we feel is best for us. And that's a principle that's embraced in evidence-based medicine,
Hmm.
but is not widely promoted here, and that we actually have a choice. And we have a choice if we can pay for it.
Exactly. That's what I was gonna say. I was like, the
We
word
don't
right
have
to
a
me.
choice if we
Right.
can't, you
Yeah,
know?
the word right to me means that you have a right means that if you can't afford it, it should be provided to you. And I think, there's this trend in the cannabis space, especially with adult use laws coming on, of this use of the word wellness. Um, and to me, it's an offensive word, in that I feel like wellness is a privileged word, that it means out of pocket in this country. It means that, and I would love for us to strive towards the definition of wellness, right? Which means that food is medicine, the air that you breathe is medicine, right? That we're looking at all of those as part of, as like the whole person initiative at FDA. Who knows where that's going to go now? But it was beautiful. The real world evidence framework at the FDA of trying to figure out these little kernels, how to actually put them into a pathway for integration. But
And this is happening on the global side. And so all of those conversations, health technology assessment
Mhm.
systems, HTA assessments, which is basically trying to get bias and inequality out of healthcare decision making, or the collation of real world evidence so
Right,
that we're not just living in this bubble of randomized controlled trials, which is what Western medicine considers to be evidence-based medicine. It was never evidence-based medicine. It was only
right,
one aspect of evidence-based medicine, but it's been held up as the poster child of what we represent, what Western medicine represents,
right,
and completely the opposite of what is represented in the traditional medicine world that lacks a robust foundation of RCTs. And again, in part because of the commerciality. That is the nice part about Asia, India, Europe, and the Middle East, and also I'm trying to push South America.
yeah, yeah,
You mentioned the South American initiative, the paper that we wrote.
Yeah, we tell everyone the name of it, and I'll put a link to it in the when I post this to YouTube.
Well, I'm not sure I really know the name of it, but actually this is part of
It's a
a
very long name. It's like
yeah, but
herbs
this is
in the
it's a
Americas.
it's an initiative throughout Pan America
That's right.
to look at the scope of botanical medicine use and the need for quality control standards,
Yep.
for traditional herbal medicines. But their perspective of traditional herbal medicine is very different than ours, right? We
Mhm.
have this Western phytopharmaceutical mentality, that
Right.
we need chemical characterization, we need GCMS, we need randomized controlled trials, we need formal toxicological studies. That's what we think when we think traditional herbal medicines in the West. They're like, oh, my grandmother got this out of the backyard and she's bringing it to the market. She's been growing, manzanilla for decades and selling it at the market and prescribing it for kids with colic and things like that. So they still have that real world, what I call real world traditional
Yeah.
orientation to botanical medicine that we kind of lost. And the sad part is that we're trying to superimpose our Western phytopharmaceutical values
Yep.
throughout the world on other countries, and to a degree, um, the WHO also falls into this mindset because it's the logical Western mindset.
Yep.
When I lecture and speak in China, India, or even in Iran, um, I'd say don't follow this model. This model has not served us well from the perspective of a health, and I do use the word from a health, vitality, and wellness
Yeah.
based
And wellness, it
perspective.
has a place. I'm not
It
anti-wellness.
does
It's not.
have a place, yeah. But because that's the stark difference between
Yep.
and actually this dovetails into one of the perspectives of the WHO Global Summit. They
Hmm.
recognize that today that 85% of the diseases that we have are diseases of behavior. They're
Yes. Yes. I love
obesity,
that term.
diabetes, arthritis, a lack of physical activity, rather than infectious diseases and acute starvation,
Right.
worldwide being the primary drivers of mortality. They recognize that no, it's not lifestyle and behavior, and there's no drug for that. And there's
Right.
no really in the US especially, there's no integrative health-oriented approach to dealing with that. Whereas in other countries that don't have the commercial opposition to
Right.
making some of that happen, that doesn't exist. So, here we have the government supporting, like corn farmers to make high fructose corn syrup, which is leading to obesity. So we're spending billions over here supporting that,
Right.
and then we're trying to spend billions for childhood obesities, right? Right. There's no sense there because it's a commercial model, whereas in pretty much virtually every other country on the face of the earth, they don't face that same dynamic. They can embrace policies that are more equitable and more health oriented than we do. Um, but at the same time, um, they still face the same commercial challenges. The drug lobby is extremely powerful, even in countries with national healthcare systems.
Yep. Yep.
Um, something gets approved here. This is a sad realization to me. Something gets approved here, and then that's leveraged to get approved in other countries.
Yep.
So, for
Yeah. No.
example,
Absolutely.
I think it was 51% of cancer drugs that were approved by FDA, based on the user fee
Yep.
program, um, were clinically ineffective. And I mean, literally, I mean,
Yeah.
clinically ineffective,
Right.
approved. And then I was speaking with a friend of mine's son-in-law who's a pharmacist at a hospital in Austria. And he's like, yeah, we use those drugs. I'm like, you guys don't do your own review? We do a cursory review, but if we figure if FDA approved it, we're going to approve it. So they might not see the headlines that this has been pulled off the market or that this has been approved based on user fees and are literally
Yep.
ineffective.
And there's actually a there's um, a relationship between EMA and the FDA now that allows an easier parts. But and there is some pushback happening actually throughout the EU for creating a bigger standard. But you know, I think that you know the concept of um, going everything seems to go back to healthcare being a right and looking at the um, the measurement of whether or not something is working should be the health of the people. And I think in that, I mean, no one argues that the United States is one of the most unhealthiest places on earth. But I think that there is an opportunity, like the inspiration that you got from the traditional council at WHO, that there is a generation that's saying like healthcare should end up in health and what that will look like. I think one of the hopes I have for cannabis's role in this is that in order to learn about cannabis as a medicine, you have to understand the endocannabinoid system. And in
Mm,
order to understand the endocannabinoid system, you have to understand nutrition.
mm,
And so you can't, you don't just throw cannabis at somebody to increase the health of their endocannabinoid system. They got to move around. They have to have better food, and maybe that will be the gateway to better understanding our body and integrative medicine. But I'm gonna ask for the check. Just kidding. That was my lunch joke. Um, but I'm gonna wrap us up here. I'm going to make sure that people know that you guys are a nonprofit, that you guys depend on donations and people purchasing monographs. And so I'll in the notes on the YouTube channel, I'll have your URL there so people can donate. And what you leave us with just what you're most excited about, where you're drawing inspiration after 30 years in this space.
I every time I read a research paper, I draw. Every time I read a paper on Bacopa, I'm like, oh my God, the botanicals do so much. But um, coming back from the global summit, my brainiac idea was to develop what's called the Global Alliance for Integrative Health and Medicine, GAIM. It's the GAIM initiative because
Love it.
so WHO, they can help set policy, right? They can recommend policies, but then it's up to the countries to
Hmm.
implement those policies. And they're being done in many countries, but it's such a bureaucratic and political process. So what the Global Alliance is meant to do is to marshal the workforce of
Hmm.
the integrative medicine and natural medicine, traditional medicine practitioners to activism. So one of my funnest projects, which I've launched, is the development of the integrative pediatrics herbal,
Yeah.
because worldwide there's all this caution that we shouldn't be treating children, and I'm like, where do you get that?
Because I
It's
don't think children don't get sick, right?
yeah, right. But I mean, the no, the that you don't want to use unproven remedies for children, the most vulnerable of our population. With all due respect, in the US, we have the worst maternal and infant mortality statistics of any country,
Right.
which means we allow more of our babies and mothers to die in the first year of their life than virtually every similarly developed country. That's appalling, and it's been like that for 30 years, and
Yeah.
they don't know how to fix it. And we're a big part of that fix. Midwifery care, traditional birthing, doula care, which is considered alternative.
Right.
But and this actually is another fun. I'm on a botanical excursion in Austria with the
Uh-huh.
University of Vienna in the Southern Tyrol's like 30 years ago, 20 years ago. And it was only for physicians and pharmacists for the most part, but there were a few midwives. And I was chit-chatting with them on the trail and like, what percentage of babies here are delivered by midwives? And she said, oh, 90%. And I'm like, what? 90%? That's incredible. Is that at home? And she said, no, no, in birth centers, hospitals,
Right.
totally integrated into their Western care. Then
Yeah.
I come home and I look at their statistics for infant and maternal mortality, and it's in the toilet. Like they almost have none. It's very like less than 5%.
Yeah.
We're twice as high of France, which has the highest rate of infant mortality in Europe, and we're twice as high as that per capita. And I'm like, get doctors out of the friggin' delivery room and get the
Yep.
women back in. So this is what I mean, just little shifts in policy. So there's also a movement right now, again, in the European Union of raising concerns about using herbal medicines in children. So I want to answer that, with this integrative
I love it.
pediatrics text. And so we have a team of three MD pediatricians, one naturopathic
Great.
physician who specializes in midwifery and pediatric care, and another herbalist and myself. And what we want to do with the GAIAM initiative, the Global Alliance, is if I put out a book or if you put out a book, that's an N of one, right? That's what
Right.
Steph says. That's what Roy says. That's what Andy
Yeah.
Weil says, for example. But if we put out any work, an academic paper, a text, an application, a webinar, whatever, from the Global Alliance of Integrative Health and Medicine, and this has been based on evidence and it's been reviewed by true experts in the discipline. Now we're speaking with one voice rather than our own individual voices. And that's what I want to do with the Global Alliance. So the first big task is this pediatric herbal, because I believe that we have to break these barriers of treating our children, of treating women, of being fearful of herbs and pregnancy. Of course, there's has to be caution with everything, but we've been using botanicals for, in pregnancy, in obstetrics care, and in pediatric care, literally for thousands of years. And it's the concern is disproportionate to the risk.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to make sure people know how to get involved. If they're going to support your work. So donate to AHP. Where can they learn more about GAIAM and some of these initiatives?
Right now, through AHP is the
Okay,
primary place. We're working on our web and our face present as we speak.
great.
Today, actually, I fly to Michigan and we'll kind of introduce it to the American Society of Pharmacognosy
Oh,
conference.
great.
And then from now until the end of the year, we'll be presenting at integrative medicine conferences in Rio, Prague, India, and Africa. So um, we're pushing it out there for predominantly for technical support,
Hmm.
experts to we want to emulate the same model of what WHO has done, is that they have different regions.
Right.
The African region, Asian region, North American or Pan American region, to have representatives,
Right.
Gaian representatives in each of these different regions, so that we can draw on the expertise of those countries so that we're speaking with one voice. And then the second part of it is once we have our face and we already have our template of what we want to do, mission statement, things like
Yep.
that. And then go after, try to go after the funding, for actually making it happen.
Yeah.
It's, going against the big machine that we have. Um, is not an easy task. There's philosophical, there's regulatory, and there's powerful um, economic
Yep.
opposition to something like this actually happening. And the money's out there. You just have to be able to find it. And so on the technical side, the financial side, and just moral support. I mean, just you giving us this forum to do this is a great help. So thank you
Of
so
course.
much.
Well, anytime, Roy, you want to come back and tell us about a progress report on GAIAM or anything you're learning from your travels, you always have a spot here. I could talk to you all day, but we've already gone over a little bit. But I could again, it's all been interesting, so I don't want to cut you off. Um,
No worries.
but congratulations, Roy, 30 years, and I know. A lot of your work is literally being the footnote of progress. But I want you to know that it's a very important footnote, and you have made a huge impact in the lives of medical cannabis patients and beyond. So thank you so much for your work and keep it up.
You too. Thank you, Steph.
Thank you, Brian.
Yeah,
Have a
take
good one.
care.